Hi, I'm Steve Shanesy, and welcome back to the Popular Woodworking Shop. I'm working on the restoration of this old Delta Unisaw. It dates way back to 1944. In this second episode, I'm going inside the machine. We're going to inspect the arbor, the bearings, and the trunnions. Since you don't have the top off your table saw every day, let's take a closer look at all the parts and how they work. As you can see, I've already removed the cast iron top and wings, and I've taken the motor out. So here are the massive castings that support the arbor and the motor. You can see how all of these rest on and is bolted to the saw cabinet in 4 locations: here, 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 and here. You know, this is what truly distinguishes a cabinet saw from a so-called hybrid saw or a contractor saw. In those saws, all these castings are bolted to the underside of the saw table above. Here's the front trunnion bracket and the trunnion. You have the same setup back here. These machined ways are the bearing surfaces that slide on each other when you tilt the saw blade. This big casting is called the yoke, and it's attached to the front trunnion bracket and at the rear. Attached to it is the motor bracket and the arbor bracket. See how the arbor bracket raises when the hand wheel is turned? You can see below here how the gear teeth on the hand wheel engage the arbor bracket to raise and lower it. And now you can see how the side hand wheel tilts the arbor when you want to make an angle cut. Now let's take a closer look at the trunnions. They look to be in good condition, even though they are 65 years old. All I need to do is give them a good cleaning and some lubrication. On the front, I'm just using an abrasive pad and some oil to rub the surfaces. That will both clean and lubricate the machined ways. In the back, there's some crud built up here. So I'm going to use a brass brush to remove it, then go over it with the abrasive pad and lubricant. So now I'm going to wipe off the excess lubricant. Did you notice there's no buildup of old grease packed with sawdust? I'm glad no one greased these over the years, and I'm not going to use any either. I don't advise using grease for 2 reasons. One, it will operate very smoothly without it, and actually using grease can make it even harder to operate. And 2, the tilt mechanism is used so infrequently that wear is rarely an issue. The same is true for the gear teeth for either adjusting the blade height or tilting it. I'll clean up these surfaces later, but mechanically, these trunnions are now ready for years more service. That was easy. Now let's look at the arbor. Here's where you mount the blade, and behind this flange is the first bearing in this casting. Here's the pulley that's driven by 3 belts. The shaft goes through the pulley into this part of the casting, and there's a second bearing in here. All this is held in place with a nut on this end. You can tell by turning the arbor that the shaft doesn't spin freely. There doesn't seem to be any play when I try moving the shaft this way, but it looks like those bearings are a problem, so let's get started replacing them. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the arbor bracket. It's held in place by this pinch bolt, so I'll loosen it up. Next, I need to remove this dust deflector. Now I can drive the bracket off its shaft by tapping on it like this. So I've got it all nice and loosened up, and now I've gotten to the keyways. I can pull it out, which will make the rest of the removal easier. So with the arbor bracket off the machine, I need to disassemble all of this to get to the bearings. The first thing I want to do is remove this nut that's holding it all together. And there's one bearing right there. You can see this bearing here and down here. Someone's been beaten on that. Might account for why it's not working so well. So I've mounted this into the vise here so I can support each side while I drive the shaft through this first bearing. And I'm going to use a small block of wood and my dead blow hammer to tap it through. Before you drive the shaft off, make sure you loosen the set screw from the pulley. And it's loose. Okay, so you want to keep track of the parts as they came off the arbor. Of course, this is the nut that held it in place. This is a special washer, the first bearing, a spacer, the pulley. This is called a load spring, a spacer, and then the last bearing, which we still have to pull off yet. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is called a bearing puller. And it's a great tool because the trick to getting the bearing off is you want to be able to pull it straight up the shaft, not having it turn from side to side with unequal pressure. So that's what this tool is going to do. Voila! So I've ordered a pair of replacement bearings, and we'll have to push these down the shaft. Now, you could take this to a machine shop and have them press them on, but I've done this before and I think it should work fine. So we want to set the bearing on the shaft. I've made a little block of Baltic birch plywood here that will slide over the shaft and cushion the blows that will strike it from this piece of old water pipe that I've cut. And of course it's hollow and it'll slide down the shaft too. So now we're ready to reassemble. The bearing's on, here's the spacer, I've got the keyway in, and here's the load spring. I want to put that on this side. I want to be able to keep an eye on the keyway while I put the pulley in place and then slide it together so that the keyway slips properly into the notch in the pulley. So now we want to drive the bearing into the casting. And there we go. Now on this side, we need to install the spacer. It slides right on. And then we need to install the next bearing. We're going to use this same hole over again to accept this end of the shaft so that when it'll slide in here, it's nicely supported as I drive this bearing in place. Now when you're putting your bearings in, you want to make sure they get started nice and even, so light taps are the way to go. And now I'll just seat it down using the pipe. We're on. So now you just hook up this little tab here with the slot. Goes on there. Reattach the nut. Tighten it up. And we're done. So with the arbor all back together, it's time to mount the bracket back on the assembly inside here. A couple of things to keep in mind. You have to align the keyway and the key before you start putting it on here. So I've got the keyway, it's engaged the shaft here, so I want to start tapping this back into place. And when you get to a point where the gear teeth down here begin to engage the teeth on the hand wheel, you want to make sure those are sliding and meshing together properly. So let's put it back in place. And there we're home. So the last thing to do with this arbor bracket is to tighten up the pinch bolt. So that's back where it needs to be. I'm going to keep working up cleaning on some of these surfaces here so it's back in really great shape. Probably do a little bit more oiling. I'll see you the next time.